Hi, I have received a few requests regarding how I change the size of a knitted garment without changing the stitch numbers in the written pattern. The short answer to this is that I change the gauge, and I shall explain this further. When I say gauge, I mean the number of stitches that you get when knitting a certain distance. In a knitting pattern, this is usually stated as the number of stitches in 10 centimeters or 1 inch. And the reason why this information is given is to enable you to knit the right size and to get the right structure of the garment. But this does not mean that you cannot change the gauge. I have an example here. The 3 mittens, they all have the same number of stitches in one round, and they have the same number of rounds. But as you can see, the size is different. And when I change the size like this, I can do it by changing yarn. I can use a thicker yarn or a thinner yarn. I can also change the size of my needles, use thicker or thinner needles than what is recommended for the pattern, or I can do a combination. And if we start here at the smallest mitten, it is knitted using a yarn that has around 175 meters in 50 grams, and I have used needle size 3 millimeters. For the blue mitten, I have used a yarn that has 110 meters in 50 grams, and I have used needle size 3.5 millimeters. And for the green mitten, I have used needle size 3.5 millimeters, same as the blue one, but I have used yarn that is slightly thicker. It has just above 90 meters in 50 grams. So these have the same needle size but different yarn. And here I have another example where I have 2 mittens knitted using the same yarn but different needle size. This one is knitted using needle size 2.5 millimeters, and this one is knitted using needle size 3 millimeters. And you can see that this one is slightly longer and wider. So these are the methods that I use to change the gauge. And to find out what gauge to use, this can easily be calculated. You need the number of stitches in your pattern. Say your pattern requires 40 stitches and you need a measurement. Perhaps you are knitting a mitten and you need the circumference here to be 20 centimeters. Now you have the information you need. You just divide 40 by 20 and you get 2. And this is the number of stitches for 1 centimeter. I like to work with 10 centimeters when I can, so I multiply by 10 and I get 20. 20 stitches in 10 centimeters that is what I need for this part of my mitten. So that is how I find out what gauge to use. And that is the stitch number this way. But you can also see here that changing the gauge also affects the length of the mittens, and that is because each row will be a little wider. So when knitting, for instance, a mitten, and it becomes longer when following the pattern, sometimes you may want to start decreasing a little sooner if the mitten becomes too long when following the drawn pattern. When knitting, say, a sweater, you knit after a measurement instead, so then you can just measure. Another thing that can be wise to do is to knit a test swatch. And what you do is to find the yarn that you would like to use. It should have a recommended gauge close to 20 stitches in 10 centimeters, because 20 was what I found out I needed. And I have started here with needle size 3 millimeters, and it's not so easy to see the transition, but here I have changed to needle size 3.5 millimeters, and here I have gone up a whole size to 4.5 millimeters. And here it is a small difference, slightly wider, slightly bigger stitches, and here it is very clear that the stitches are bigger and that my swatch is wider. So by doing this you can find out what needles you need to get the right gauge. Is the yarn suitable for the gauge that you need? You can try here and see how it behaves when stretched, when it is knitted tight, medium, loose. And this way you can find out beforehand what your project will look like using the yarn and needles that you decide. So that's it, and I hope you have been slightly enlightened when it comes to how you can change the size of your knitting project without taking away or adding stitches to the pattern. Thank you for watching.